Hello and welcome to Unpacking and Repacking Content Standards, a quick guide to help answer the question, what do I want them to learn? I'm Ildi Laczko-Kerr and I'm the founder and CEO of Lotus Training Consulting Group. And I've been working with teachers and leaders for almost 20 years in a variety of capacities. But my passion is helping teachers understand how to develop high quality, rigorous, standards aligned units of instruction to help master content standards. And so today's session is really going to be focusing on helping you understand the components of our 4-step guide to unpacking content standards and how to apply them to help unpack your grade level content standards. By the end of the session, you'll also understand the resources that are available to you to do this work. The first set of resources that I'd like to invite you to investigate are on the State Department of Education's webpage under the AZMERIT resources section. You might be surprised that the most useful tools around unpacking and repacking content standards in grades, the assessed grades in English language arts and mathematics are actually on the assessment website and not on the standards website. But for all other content areas, you'll go to the standards page and pull up your content standards directly from the Department of Ed webpage. The item specifications document is a document that you may have not used before in the past, but I consider it the best tool that gives you the most bang for your buck. And so the item specifications are organized by grade level and content, so English language arts and mathematics separately. And you'll notice that the language of the content standard is at the top of the page here. It indicates how that item would be assessed, and content limits, which describe the extent to which the assessment items will measure that particular standard. And then item formats, the different varieties and versions of assessment questions, as well as task demands and common responses. And so the item specifications document provided a lot of additional information to teachers to help them better understand the depth and the complexity of the content standards as they'll be assessed. There's also a copy of an example for 7th grade math. And unlike, similar to the ELA example, you'll still see explanations and content limits, but it'll also tell you whether or not any context is allowed and task demands. And so these item specifications, as we'll see later, are going to be really helpful in creating student-friendly learning targets and success criteria. In addition to the item specifications, that document also provides teachers a wealth of other information. If you're teaching English language arts or selecting text for your students, you'll see that it provides you word count ranges for reading passages and listening stimuli in terms of the number of passages in minutes, and then editing tasks. So again, thinking about planning for effective instruction, these tools and resources are really useful to teachers to ensure that you're preparing students at the appropriate level of rigor as you're selecting text. The item specifications also help teachers determine how much time you should be spending on the content standards. So reporting out by the standard into the domain level. And so there are blueprints by grade level for English language arts and mathematics. And you can see the mathematics blueprints get a little bit more complicated in terms of some of the breakdown as you get into the end of course exams in Algebra 1 and geometry and so on. While there are changes to the statewide assessments coming up, these blueprints and the other grade levels will remain the same. In addition, the item specifications document helps you understand how rigorous the content standard will be as it's measured on the state assessment. And so if you think about the web's depth of knowledge, you can see, depending on the subject, whether or not and what percentage of the items come from each of the depth of knowledge levels. This is an English language arts example, and you'll see that there's a depth of knowledge 4, which comes through in the writing assessment. Depth of knowledge for mathematics only goes up to level 3 because of the demands of the statewide assessment. And the last resource that I want to make sure that we have access to and that you're familiar with is the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix. This is an example of a reading matrix, and we'll see an example of a math matrix in a second, but there are content examples for almost all of the other content areas on her webpage. And the Cognitive Rigor Matrix really combines the Bloom's taxonomy, which helps you understand the type of thinking that's needed for a student to complete the task, along with the web's depth of knowledge, which helps you understand how deeply students have to understand the content to be successful, and how complex or abstract the students have to understand the content in order to be successful interacting with it. So here's an example of the math and science cognitive rigor matrix, and you can see that the interaction between the Webb's DOK level 1 and the Bloom's taxonomy gives you a way of describing some of the activities or tasks that students might do in response to that particular content. The cognitive rigor matrix was developed initially for item writers to make sure that they could create performance tasks and items that are addressing the depth of knowledge and complexity of the standard. Teachers should use this to help unpack your standards so that you can really understand the depth of knowledge and the level of rigor of the standard. And as you're planning instructional design or creating your own assessments or performance tasks, the cognitive rigor matrix is really helpful for you to check against. It should not be used as a checklist of activities. It's certainly not comprehensive enough to do that, but it is a guide to help you understand some of the activities that you could create in lessons, as well as the ways that you would assess student knowledge. So I'm going to stop and have you think for a minute. Feel free to pause the video now if you'd like, and think about the following questions on your screen. How can you use these resources, the AZMERIT resources and the Hess matrix, to plan? Where in your planning process could you use them? How do you think that they'll impact you in your planning? And what support might you need to use them in the future? So again, feel free to pause and answer these questions for a few minutes and then come back. All right, so welcome back. So let's get at it. This is our 4-step process to unpacking our content standards. Step 1 is the analysis of the standard itself. Teachers are going to be working directly in the standard to identify knowledge and skills. Step 2 is the assessment analysis, and this is what makes our 4-step process unique, where we actually have you look at assessment items that are aligned to the content standard and the item specification document if you're a tested subject area content area teacher, to really develop a deeper understanding of the knowledge and skills, as well as help identify the rigor. Step 3 is developing student-friendly learning targets, which are really statements that are easy to understand and interpret by students, teachers, and parents that reflect the knowledge and skills. And the last step is developing success criteria, which are really concrete representations of students' demonstration of the learning target. It's really anything that a student can say, do, produce, or create to show you as the teacher and themselves that they've met the learning goal. So let's take each of these 4 steps separately. Before we do that, here's our planning template so that you can see each of the 4 steps is represented here. So take a quick minute, and you may pause the video if you'd like to just familiarize yourself with this template. What looks familiar to you? What's new to you? And keep in mind that this is just a tool to guide your work. If you've used different templates in the past where you've unpacked standards and you're using this as a resource, likely this most significant difference is step 2 of our template. So go ahead and pause the video if you'd like to just take a minute to familiarize yourself. Okay, so now that we're back to step 1, we want to make sure that teachers are working directly with the language of the standard. So again, we recommend grade level and content area teachers that have a state-aligned assessment are using the item specifications document because it's the most bang for your buck again. But if not, you can use the standards documents themselves. And we want you to identify the knowledge, which is represented by nouns in the language of the standard, and skills, which are represented by the verbs that need to be learned. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You could color code it, you could circle it, you could put stars around it, whatever you'd like to do to distinguish the knowledge and skills in the content standards. You're going to transfer those into the appropriate places on your template. I do want to make sure that teachers understand that you are using the academic content standards for this purpose and are not substituting any other prepared curriculum documents unless the standard is fully intact in those curriculum documents. Step 2 is the unique part of our 4-step process, and that's the analysis of the assessment. So we want you to take assessment items that are aligned to the content standard, and that's a really critical and important part of this process. You need to be sure that you're assessing the standard with the item that you're reviewing. Once you've got items that are aligned, or you're using the item specifications document, we're going to have you go through and identify additional knowledge and skills. Again, those nouns and those verbs to help determine what other components are required for students to be successful. And then from that, we're going to have you use the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix to determine the level of rigor of the standard. If you're not sure where to access items for review, you could look at AZMERIT practice items. Again, if you're in a grade level or content area that's tested, you could look at any of your benchmark assessment item banks if you have a tool that your school or district or charter school uses. If you're in a grade or content that's assessed using the English Language Arts and Math standards, the Achieve the Core website has a plethora of assessment resources with items, or you can just turn to your instructional resources or materials that you've been using and identify those that are aligned to the standard. Once you've gone through and selected a handful of items or used the item specifications document and found those additional nouns and verbs, you're going to add those in the appropriate place on the template in section 2. So once you've identified the knowledge and skills and you understand what level of rigor you're going to need to prepare students, the third step is really developing those student-friendly learning targets. And here are a few tips. Using the performance level descriptors, which are found in the item specifications document if you're a tested subject or content, or in the standards documents available to you online, those can be a guide to help you understand the embedded knowledge and the underpinnings of the standard. Also describes specifically what they expect students to do at the 4 performance levels of the standard. Then you as a teacher have to describe the knowledge and skills that you've represented in steps 1 and 2 before on the template in a way that makes sense to everyone, in particular to students. This is a really important step because this step is what we're going to use to help plan standards aligned lessons. So in order to have a really clear understanding of what the standard contains, translating it into student-friendly language makes that explicitly clear. We're also going to create success criteria and assessments, daily objectives, and unit and lesson plans from these student-friendly learning targets. So this is a really important step. You're going to complete the student-friendly learning targets in the 3rd step section of the template. Just a couple of words about some attributes of how to create clear learning targets. Learning targets should be able to be accomplished in just a few days, some as often as 1 day. And again, we're going to turn these into daily objectives later. They should be specific to the what and the how and consist of those concepts and skills, the knowledge and skills of the standard. You should be able to teach these learning targets using a variety of instructional methods and tools, resources, and that they should be able to apply into multiple contexts. So these are not specific activities that you're having students do, but really the content of the standard. And you want to make sure that you think of them as sequenced or scaffolded accomplishments as it relates to the standard. They are not designed to be long-term, so this is not a unit or semester-long plan. These are very concrete and targeted. They're not ambitious or global concepts, and they're not really thinking about this in teaching in just one specific way using one specific resource or tool. Again, don't focus on the activity, but focus on the knowledge and skill. Once you've identified your learning targets and put them in section 3 of the template, then you're going to create associated success criteria for each of those learning targets. And success criteria really are the guidelines to help you and your students monitor their progress towards the goal. That criteria can be used by students to assess how closely their work matches your expectations. You could even think of these as exemplars of excellence towards the standard or the learning goal. They're really important to help not only you understand the target, but your student. And so once a student understands the target and the criteria for success, they're more empowered to monitor their own learning, to be independent learners, and to really use that as a way to give feedback through metacognition. It certainly provides you an opportunity to give students clear feedback as well. Success criteria, again, describe anything that you can have students say, do, or produce to show you and themselves that they've met that learning target. Your goal is to describe the specific performance that demonstrates meeting the learning target. And again, you can use the performance level descriptors to help you do that if you're in a grade or content area that's assessed by the state assessment. Regardless, you can consider these 3 questions. What would the standard if mastered look like in terms of student work? What evidence can we expect students to generate or create that demonstrates their proficiency? Or consider, what would a proficient student look like? Here are a couple of examples of completed Unpack standards. You can see the full language of the standard is embedded at the top so that we know exactly which standard we're using. Please do not just write the numeric codes, because I promise you, you will not be able to remember what those all mean. You can see step 1 is the first unpacked knowledge and skills. And once we've gone to the assessment level, you can see the additional knowledge and skills that must be required for a student to be successful at this grade level and content. The level of rigor in terms of Bloom's and DOK, and the associated student-friendly learning targets and their corresponding success criteria. Here's an example of 7th grade math, and you'll see that every time you do the assessment analysis, there will always be additional knowledge and skills that you'll be able to glean and gather from those assessments and or those item specifications. The student-friendly learning targets and success criteria are designed to be one-to-one, but oftentimes there might be more than a one-to-one relationship in terms of your success criteria, and we'll see that in the example of the high school English language arts. Where in this case, the way that we've written these success criteria associated with the learning targets, there's actually several success criteria for each learning target. So voila, you're done. If you're using our 4-step unpacking standards process, you have successfully identified the essential knowledge and skills needed for mastery of the content standard. You've extended your understanding of those knowledge and skills that are necessary for your students to demonstrate mastery by looking at assessments. You've created clarity around what you must teach and what students must learn. And then you've created guidelines for students to monitor their own learning and progress towards mastering of those learning goals. So congratulations. If you have any questions about our 4-step process of unpacking standards and this quick guide, feel free to email me at the email on the screen. And I want to say thank you for joining us for our Unpacking and Repacking the Content Standards. I hope that this information is helpful to you, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.